Beyond the snow-covered peaks of the Hindu Kush, thousands of miles from Greece, archaeologists uncovered the remains of something almost impossible, a forgotten Greek kingdom in the heart of Central Asia. Its kings built theatres beside Afghan rivers, minted coins in Greek and Indian languages, crossed mountains with war elephants, and ruled lands history nearly erased. Before we uncover how this extraordinary kingdom rose, expanded, and vanished. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy exploring the lost mysteries of the ancient world. At dawn, the Hindu Kush does not look like a boundary between worlds. It looks like the end of the world itself. Peaks rise in broken walls of stone and snow, their upper slopes catching the first cold light while the valleys below remain buried in shadow. The air is thin, the pass is narrow, and every road seems temporary, as though a single winter storm could erase it. Yet more than 2,000 years ago, armies crossed these mountains carrying bronze armour, Greek speech, Macedonian weapons, and memories of cities beside the Aegean Sea. Beyond the passes lay a land so distant from the Mediterranean that later generations would almost forget Greeks had ever ruled there. But they did. They built cities, minted coins, raised temples, fought Indian kings, bargained with nomads, and created one of the strangest kingdoms of the ancient world. The kingdom lay in Bactria, a region spread across parts of modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, with its heart in the fertile lands south of the Oxus River, known today as the Amudarya. To outsiders, Central Asia is often imagined as an endless dry expanse, but ancient Bactria was not simply desert. Rivers descending from the mountains fed cultivated plains where wheat, barley, grapes, and fruit could grow. Irrigation turned valleys into productive farmland. While routes through the Hindu Kush connected the region to northern India, roads westward led toward Iran and Mesopotamia, paths northward opened onto the steppe. Bactria stood at a meeting point, and that position made it wealthy, desirable, and dangerously difficult to hold. The mystery is not that Greeks reached this place. Alexander the Great's campaigns explain their arrival. The deeper mystery is how Greek power survived here after Alexander was gone, separated from the Mediterranean by thousands of kilometers of hostile territory, rival empires, deserts, mountains, and rebellious populations. The settlers who remained beyond the Hindu Kush could not rely forever on orders from distant capitals. They had to adapt or disappear. What emerged was not merely a transplanted Greek colony, nor a simple foreign occupation. It became a layered society in which Greek institutions existed beside Iranian customs, Central Asian traditions, and later Indian religions and political ideas. Its rulers displayed Greek gods on their coins, yet governed subjects who spoke many languages and followed beliefs older than Greek presence in the region. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The story begins with distance. From the old Greek heartlands, Bactria was almost unimaginably remote. A message from the Aegean could take months to arrive, assuming it survived bandits, storms, political borders, and mountain roads. Reinforcements might never come. A ruler in Bactria could not behave like a governor in a nearby province. He commanded a frontier where loyalty depended on local soldiers, regional elites, fortified cities, and control of the roads. If central authority weakened, independence became not only possible but practical. That remoteness also distorted how later historians remembered the kingdom. Most surviving Greek and Roman writers viewed Bactria from afar. They offered brief descriptions, fragments of political history, and occasional stories of unusually rich kings. Their accounts are incomplete and often written long after the events. Local written records have survived only in small numbers. Much of what is known comes instead from coins buried in hoards, ruined city walls, fragments of inscriptions, temple remains, and objects uncovered beneath fields or destroyed settlements. A single coin can preserve the face of a ruler whose reign is otherwise almost unknown. A Greek name may appear on one side, while another language or symbol appears on the other. These objects reveal a kingdom that is visible in flashes, never all at once. What survives in the record suggests that the Greeks of Bactria understood both their isolation and their opportunity. They lived far from the great Hellenistic capitals, but they also controlled lands rich in agricultural production, horses, precious materials, and trade. Bactria had long been valued before Alexander arrived. Earlier Persian kings had governed it as an important eastern province of the Achaemenid Empire. Its people were not waiting for civilization to be brought from the west. They possessed established settlements, irrigation systems, political traditions, and connections stretching across the Iranian world and deep into Central Asia. When Macedonian soldiers entered this landscape, they encountered communities capable of resisting them. Alexander's conquest of the eastern Iranian regions was among the hardest parts of his career. Victory in a pitched battle does not guarantee control of a valley. Fortresses had to be taken one by one. Local leaders changed sides. Horsemen could vanish into terrain that foreign infantry barely understood. Revolts returned after they seemed defeated. Alexander responded with a mixture of violence, negotiation, marriage alliances, and settlement. Greek and Macedonian soldiers were placed in new or expanded towns, partly to secure the region and partly because transporting every veteran home was impossible. Some of these settlers resented being left so far east. Ancient accounts describe revolts among Greeks who wished to abandon the region after rumours spread that Alexander had died. The reports may be shaped by later storytelling, and scholars still debate the exact scale of these uprisings. But the tension is believable. For men raised near the Mediterranean, Bactria could feel like permanent exile. The mountain passes closed in winter. Familiar temples and family estates lay beyond distances most would never cross again. Their children, however, would know a different world. They would grow up among Bactrian fields, Iranian nobles, local cavalrymen, multilingual markets, and roads leading toward India rather than Greece. Over time, this changed the meaning of being Greek in the East. It remained connected to language, education, military status, public architecture, and civic life. But it could no longer depend on geography. Greek identity became something maintained through institutions: the gymnasium, the theatre, the coinage of kings, the worship of familiar gods, and the design of public spaces. Yet those institutions stood in an Asian landscape and depended on Asian wealth. A Greek-style city might contain local building techniques. A ruler with a Greek name might command Iranian cavalry. A royal court might celebrate Hellenic ancestry, while negotiating with communities whose traditions reached back centuries before Alexander. This was the contradiction at the centre of the Hidden Kingdom. It was Greek, but not simply Greek. It was Bactrian, but ruled for generations by dynasties with Macedonian origins. It faced west toward the Hellenistic world, south toward India, and north toward the steppe. Its strength came from standing between civilizations, but the same position exposed it to pressure from every direction. For a time, the kingdom beyond the Hindu Kush would become powerful enough to challenge empires, wealthy enough to mint enormous gold coins, and ambitious enough to send armies into India. But its foundations were laid long before independence, in the uneasy encounter between conquerors and land that could absorb them. To understand how a Greek king eventually rose in Bactria, it is first necessary to understand the world he inherited, a region already ancient, already rich, and never as empty as its conquerors imagined. Long before Macedonian soldiers appeared beneath the high passes, Bactria had already become one of the great inhabited crossroads of Inner Eurasia. Its wealth did not come from a single city or a single resource, but from the unusual combination of fertile valleys, mountain water, defensible terrain, and roads leading in several directions at once. The Oxus River carried life through an otherwise demanding landscape, while smaller rivers descending from the Hindu Kush and the Pamirs fed fields, orchards, and settlements. Irrigation channels required planning, labour, and local authority. Their existence points to communities that were organised enough to reshape the land and maintain it across generations. The region's geography created sharp contrasts. Snow-covered mountains stood above dry plains. Green agricultural zones could end abruptly where canals no longer reached. Fortified settlements rose near routes used by traders, herders, officials, and armies. To the south, narrow passages crossed the Hindu Kush toward the Indus Basin. To the west lay the Iranian plateau and the old imperial centres of Persia. To the north stretched the open grasslands of Central Asia, where mobile pastoral peoples moved with horses, sheep, and cattle. Bactria lived between the settled and nomadic worlds, and neither could be ignored. Archaeological evidence shows that urban and agricultural life in this wider region reached back thousands of years before Alexander. Communities built mud brick structures, worked metal, produced ceramics, and participated in exchange networks that linked distant cultures. One of the most remarkable early archaeological horizons associated with southern Central Asia is often called the Bactria-Margiana archaeological complex. Flourishing during the Bronze Age, it included large fortified sites, monumental buildings, skilled craft production, and long-distance connections. The precise relationship between these Bronze Age societies and the later inhabitants of historical Bactria remains debated, and the evidence does not permit a simple line of descent. But their remains make one fact difficult to dismiss. Complex civilization in this landscape was not a Greek invention. Centuries later, Bactria became part of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. The Persian kings governed an immense territory stretching from Anatolia and Egypt to the borders of India and Central Asia. Bactria occupied one of its eastern satrapies, or administrative provinces, and its location made it both valuable and sensitive. A satrap ruling there had access to resources, soldiers, and important routes, but also operated far from the imperial court. The same remoteness that would later favour Greek independence already gave eastern governors unusual room for ambition. Persian royal inscriptions include Bactria among the lands claimed by the Great King. These formal lists were statements of universal power, but control on the ground depended on local cooperation. Imperial administration did not simply erase regional society. Persian authority worked through governors, tax systems, military obligations, roads, and alliances with local elites. Bactrian nobles likely retained influence over land and cavalry forces. The empire could demand loyalty, tribute, and troops, while allowing many local practices to continue. Bactria was especially famous for horses. Central Asian breeding traditions produced animals valued in warfare and travel, and cavalry remained essential in a region where open plains favoured speed. Later, Macedonian armies would discover that controlling cities was not enough when mounted opponents could strike, retreat, and reappear across enormous distances. The military importance of Bactrian and Sogdian horsemen was already established under Persian rule. Some served in imperial armies far from home, carrying Eastern fighting traditions into conflicts with the Greek world. When the Persian king Xerxes invaded Greece in the 5th century before the Common Era, troops from Bactria reportedly formed part of his multinational force. Greek observers therefore knew something of the region long before Alexander reached it, though their knowledge was mixed with distance and imagination. To them, Bactria belonged to the far interior of the Persian Empire, a wealthy eastern land associated with cavalry, exotic clothing, and the outer limits of the known political world. It was not entirely unknown, but it was remote enough to attract exaggeration. The region also benefited from trade, although it would be misleading to imagine the later Silk Roads already operating as a single organised highway. Exchange moved through overlapping networks rather than one continuous road. Goods passed from merchant to merchant, market to market, sometimes travelling farther than the people who first produced them could have imagined. Precious stones from the mountains, metals, livestock, textiles, timber, spices, and agricultural products moved across these routes. Lapis lazuli from northeastern Afghanistan had travelled westward since prehistoric times, reaching Mesopotamia and Egypt. Its deep blue colour appeared in royal jewellery and sacred objects thousands of kilometres from the mines where it originated. This trade did more than enrich rulers. It made Bactria culturally porous. Languages, religious practices, artistic forms, and technologies arrived with travellers. Iranian traditions dominated much of the region, but local identities remained diverse. Religious life probably centred on forces associated with fire, water, the sky, fertility, and royal authority. Though reconstructing exact beliefs is difficult, later Zoroastrian traditions provide clues, but scholars still debate how closely they reflect earlier Bactrian practice. The evidence remains incomplete, especially because religious architecture and ritual objects can be interpreted in more than one way. What can be seen more clearly is that Bactria possessed its own political weight. During periods of weakness within the Persian Empire, its governors could become kingmakers or rebels. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria during Alexander's invasion, played a central role in the final collapse of Achaemenid resistance. After the Persian king Darius III was defeated and fled eastward, Bessus and other commanders arrested him. Darius was later killed, and Bessus declared himself king under the name Artaxerxes, attempting to continue Persian resistance from the eastern provinces. His decision reveals how Bactria was viewed from within the empire. It was not a forgotten borderland where defeated officials went to hide. It was a possible base for rebuilding power. Bessus could draw upon territory, troops, fortresses, and regional prestige. He understood that Alexander's conquest would remain incomplete as long as the East refused submission. For Alexander, this transformed Bactria from a distant objective into the center of resistance. The Macedonian king could claim the Persian throne, but a rival king still stood beyond the mountains. The pursuit that followed would drag his army into years of hard campaigning across Bactria and neighbouring Sogdiana. There, the conqueror who had broken the largest empire of his age would encounter a landscape that resisted simple victory. The old Persian province was about to become a military trap, a settlement zone, and eventually the foundation of an independent Greek monarchy. Yet beneath every new fortress and Greek inscription remained the older world of canals, cavalry, trade, and local power that made such a kingdom possible. Alexander reaches Bactria not as an explorer entering an unknown land, but as a king pursuing another king. Bessus has claimed the Persian throne after the death of Darius III, and as long as he remains free, Alexander's victory over the Achaemenid Empire is incomplete. In the spring of 329 BCE, the Macedonian army crosses the Hindu Kush through freezing passes where pack animals collapse. Provisions become scarce, and snow conceals the road. The soldiers descend, expecting that the capture of Bessus will finish the Eastern War. Instead, they enter the most exhausting phase of Alexander's conquest. Bessus attempts to deny the invaders food by destroying supplies and withdrawing northward, but his authority begins to fracture. Local leaders understand that supporting him may bring Alexander's army directly upon their lands. Spitamenes, a powerful Sogdian noble, joins others in arresting Bessus and delivering him to the Macedonians. Alexander has the captive mutilated and later executed as a traitor to Darius. The rival king is gone, yet resistance does not disappear with him. Spitamenes has merely removed a weakened claimant and preserved his own freedom of action. The rebellion that follows spreads across Sogdiana and reaches into Bactria. It is not a conventional war with a single capital to seize or a single army to defeat. Local horsemen move quickly between settlements, deserts, river valleys, and fortified rocks. They strike isolated garrisons, interrupt communications, and disappear before the heavier Macedonian forces can trap them. Alexander repeatedly takes towns that must be taken again. Every fortress left behind requires soldiers, and every garrison reduces the strength of the army still marching forward. At Marikanda, near modern Samarkand, Spitamenes besieges the Macedonian garrison. Alexander sends a relief force, but the column is drawn toward the Polytometus River and attacked by Sogdian cavalry and mounted archers. The Macedonians attempt to form defensive lines, yet their opponents keep their distance, firing from horseback and exploiting every sign of disorder. The relief force is nearly destroyed. It is one of the worst reverses suffered by Alexander's army, though later accounts differ over its details. What survives in the record suggests that the defeat shocked the Macedonians because it showed how little their earlier victories guaranteed here. Alexander responds with speed and severity. Settlements suspected of supporting rebellion are assaulted, populations are killed or displaced, and the countryside is punished to deprive resistance fighters of shelter. Ancient authors often describe these campaigns through the language of heroic conquest. But the human reality is harsher burned villages, abandoned canals, seized livestock, and families caught between local rebels and occupying troops. No single explanation fully accounts for the intensity of resistance. Political independence, resentment of foreign garrisons, loyalty to local elites, disruption of religious practices, and the violence of invasion probably all played a part. Even Alexander cannot be everywhere. While he races toward one revolt, another begins behind him. Spitamenes avoids decisive battle and draws support from steppe peoples beyond the settled valleys. His mobility reveals a weakness in Macedonian warfare. Alexander's infantry can break major armies, storm walls, and hold ground. But it cannot easily force mounted opponents to fight. He adapts by using local cavalry, dividing his commands, strengthening garrisons, and campaigning through winter. Eventually Spitamenes is abandoned and killed by allies who fear Alexander's retaliation. The rebellion loses its most effective leader, though control remains uneven. The great fortified rocks of Sogdiana become symbols of the final struggle. Local nobles and their families retreat to strongholds perched above cliffs they believe no army can climb. Macedonian volunteers scale difficult approaches at night, sometimes using iron tent pegs and linen ropes. The famous stories may have been polished by later writers, but the underlying pattern is clear. Alexander must demonstrate that no refuge is beyond his reach. At one stronghold, he encounters Roxana, the daughter of the noble Oxyates. Their marriage is both personal and political, binding the conqueror to an important local family and signalling that accommodation will follow devastation. Alexander also adopts elements of Persian court ceremony and places Iranian nobles in positions of authority. Many Macedonians resent these changes. To them, the king appears increasingly distant, surrounded by customs associated with the empire they defeated. In Bactria, however, ruling only through Macedonian force is impossible. Alexander needs local cavalry, administrators, guides, food suppliers, and aristocratic cooperation. His marriage alliances and mixed appointments are practical attempts to stabilize a frontier that refuses to remain conquered. Cities and military settlements form another part of that strategy. New Alexandrias are founded or existing settlements are enlarged along roads, river crossings, and vulnerable borders. Veterans, mercenaries, and displaced Greeks are ordered to live in them. These communities guard routes and create islands of royal authority. But settlement is not the same as willing migration. Many colonists have been left thousands of kilometers from home with little realistic prospect of return. Some are wounded veterans or men considered troublesome. Their towns carry Greek names, yet beyond the walls stand unfamiliar communities that remember recent massacres. A lesser-known warning comes before Alexander leaves the east. In 326 BCE, a false report of his death appears to inspire thousands of Greek settlers in the upper satrapies to abandon their posts and attempt to return west. The exact scale remains uncertain, but the episode exposes how fragile the colonial system is. Fear of Alexander holds it together more effectively than affection for Bactria. When the king survives, order is restored, yet the desire to leave does not vanish. By 327 BCE, Alexander can move south toward India and claim that Bactria and Sogdiana have been subdued. Fortresses are occupied, local nobles have submitted, and roads are guarded by settlements bearing the marks of Greek civic life. But the peace rests on coercion, compromise, and exhausted populations. Macedonian officers govern beside Iranian elites. Greek soldiers form households locally. Children begin growing up who will never see the Mediterranean lands their fathers still call home. Then, in 323 BCE, Alexander dies in Babylon. News travels slowly eastward, but its meaning is immediate. The authority that forced distant garrisons to remain in place has vanished. Thousands of settlers prepare to march west, while Alexander's generals begin dividing an empire whose eastern provinces they barely understand. The conquest has planted Greek communities beyond the Hindu Kush, but it has not created a stable political order. That task will fall to successors ruling from even farther away. The death of Alexander does not release the eastern settlers from empire. It merely replaces one overwhelming authority with several competing ones. In Babylon, Alexander's generals divide commands, provinces, armies, treasuries, and royal titles while pretending that the empire can somehow remain whole. Bactria is assigned to governors whose names change as alliances collapse and new wars begin. From the perspective of the distant east, the succession struggle must seem both urgent and strangely remote. Orders still arrive in the name of Macedonian power, but the men issuing them are often dead, defeated, or overthrown before the messages reach the Oxus. The Greek settlers who had hoped to return home after Alexander's death make one of the first attempts to escape this uncertain world. Ancient accounts claim that thousands gathered to march westward from the upper satrapies. They were organized enough to form an army, but their departure threatened to strip the frontier of the soldiers required to defend it. Perdiccas, acting as a regent for Alexander's heirs, sends forces to stop them. The settlers are defeated, and many are killed after surrendering. The survivors are forced back into the eastern communities they had tried to abandon. This violent episode gives the settlements a new character. The first generation may still think of Bactria as exile, but there is no longer an easy road home. Farms, marriages, commercial interests, and local alliances gradually bind the settlers to the region. Their children inherit Greek names and military traditions, but Bactria is the only homeland many of them know. The mountains no longer separate temporary occupiers from Greece. They separate an emerging Eastern Greek society from a Western world that grows increasingly absorbed in its own wars. For several decades, the struggle among Alexander's successors determines who can claim Bactria. The most successful of these rulers is Seleucus, a former officer who eventually controls Babylonia, Iran, Syria, and much of the Asian territory once conquered by Alexander. His empire is enormous, stretching from the eastern Mediterranean towards Central Asia, yet its size hides a permanent weakness. No court can watch every frontier, and every long road gives provincial rulers opportunities to behave independently. Seleucus understands the importance of the East. He campaigns across Iran and advances toward India, where he confronts the expanding Mauryan Empire under Chandragupta. The precise details remain uncertain, but the struggle ends in an agreement. Seleucus surrenders territories near the Indus and receives hundreds of war elephants, animals that later play a decisive role in battles farther west. A marriage alliance may also have been arranged, though scholars still debate what form it took. The treaty recognizes a political reality the eastern edge of the Hellenistic world cannot be defended by ambition alone. Bactria remains within the Seleucid system, governed through satraps and supported by Greek cities, military colonies, and local elites. For a time, the arrangement works, Seleucid coinage circulates, royal authority is acknowledged, and the region contributes resources to an empire whose rulers present themselves as heirs to Alexander. But the kings increasingly focus on conflicts closer to Syria and Mesopotamia. They fight rival Macedonian dynasties, suppress rebellions, and struggle over Anatolia. Every Western war weakens their grip on the Far East. Distance encourages provincial identity. A governor in Bactria cannot wait for instructions during a nomadic raid, a local uprising, or a dispute over irrigation and taxation. He must maintain troops, negotiate with aristocrats, protect trade routes, and keep the cities loyal. In practice, he performs many duties of a king before daring to use the title. The wealth of the province makes independence tempting, while the geography makes it possible. At some point in the middle of the 3rd century BCE, a man named Diodotus takes the decisive step. He is the Seleucid governor of Bactria, though little is known of his origins or early career. He may have governed under Antiochus III and Antiochus Thess, gradually building a power base among soldiers and local elites. The exact date of his revolt remains debated because the surviving written sources are brief and later, while the coins reveal change without explaining every political stage. The transformation can be followed through royal imagery. Early coins associated with Diodotus still bear the name of the Seleucid king, even though the portrait and symbols may reflect growing local authority. Later issues appear in Diodotus's own name. Zeus is shown hurling a thunderbolt, a forceful image for a ruler declaring that sovereignty has moved from a distant dynasty into his own hands. Coinage is not merely money. It pays soldiers, supports trade, and carries the ruler's face through markets and garrisons. By placing his own identity upon it, Diodotus announces that Bactria now has a king. This is not a popular national revolt in the modern sense. The new kingdom remains ruled by a Greek-speaking elite descended partly from conquerors and settlers, yet Diodotus cannot succeed through Greeks alone. He needs the cooperation of Bactrian landholders, Iranian cavalry, city administrators, merchants, and communities responsible for maintaining the agricultural system. Independence therefore emerges from a local coalition of interests, even if its official language and royal symbols remain Hellenistic. The timing favours him. The Seleucid king Antiochus II is weakened by war in the west and by a dynastic crisis that follows his death. At nearly the same moment, Parthia breaks away in the lands west of Bactria, where Arsaces and his followers establish another independent power. This development creates both protection and danger for Diodotus. The loss of Parthia further separates Bactria from the Seleucid heartlands, making reconquest more difficult, but it also places an ambitious new kingdom across Bactria's western routes. Diodotus reportedly allies with Seleucus Thecke against the Parthians, suggesting that independence does not end diplomatic calculation. Former rebels can become useful partners when a shared enemy appears. The political landscape is no longer divided simply between empire and province. It has become a shifting field of Greek dynasties, Iranian rulers, frontier governors, nomadic groups, and Indian powers. By the time Diodotus dies, probably around the late 230s BCE, he has accomplished something Alexander's settlers could scarcely have imagined. The remote garrison zone has become an independent monarchy. His successor, Diodotus II, inherits a kingdom with its own army, treasury, coinage, and ambitions. Yet the dynasty itself will not last long. Another man is already gathering support. And the struggle over who rules Bactria will reveal how quickly the new kingdom has learned the politics of the Hellenistic world. Kings rise through rebellion, and they are often replaced by the same method. The new kingdom does not announce its power only through armies and coins. It reshapes the landscape. Across Bactria, fortified settlements grow into administrative centres, markets, and symbols of royal authority. The most revealing of them stands near the meeting of two rivers in what is now northern Afghanistan, close to the edge of the Hindu Kush. Its ancient name is uncertain, but archaeologists call it Ai-Khanoum. For centuries, the city lay buried beneath dust and rubble, almost entirely absent from surviving written history. When excavations began in the 20th century, they uncovered something that seemed improbable even to specialists: a large Hellenistic city built deep in Central Asia, complete with a theatre, gymnasium, monumental palace, temples, fountains, Greek inscriptions, and carefully planned streets. Ai-Khanoum does not resemble a temporary military camp. It is designed for permanence. Thick defensive walls protect a lower city beside the river and an elevated citadel above it. The setting is strategic, commanding routes between Bactria, the mountain valleys, and approaches leading south toward India. Water, farmland, and defensible ground make the location valuable. But the city is more than a fortress. It is a statement that Greek political and cultural life has taken root far beyond the Mediterranean. Entering the city in its height, a visitor might first encounter the scale of the royal and administrative quarter. A vast palace complex spreads across several hectares, organized around courtyards, colonnades, reception rooms, storerooms, and offices. Its layout reflects Hellenistic ideas of royal display, yet some features resemble older traditions of Near Eastern and Persian palace architecture. Greek columns stand beside building techniques adapted to local materials. Mud brick, common throughout Central Asia, supports forms that would have looked familiar to someone from the Greek world. The result is not an exact copy of Athens, Alexandria, or Seleucia. It is a new architectural language shaped by distance, climate, available labour, and the expectations of a mixed population. The palace serves as the machinery of government. Here officials record taxes, store grain, manage payments, receive ambassadors, and distribute resources to soldiers and administrators. The kingdom's wealth depends on turning agricultural surplus and trade into royal power. A city such as Ai-Khanoum allows the crown to supervise the surrounding countryside while projecting authority toward the frontier. Its courtyards are therefore not merely decorative. They are spaces where hierarchy becomes visible. Nearby stands a theatre capable of holding thousands of spectators. Its presence is one of the clearest signs that Greek civic culture remains important. Theatre in the Hellenistic world is entertainment, education, ceremony, and political identity at once. Performances preserve stories of gods, heroes, kings, war, pride, and ruin. In Bactria, they also help maintain a shared cultural memory among people separated from the Mediterranean by generations and enormous distance. Yet the audience cannot have been culturally uniform. Greek settlers, soldiers, local elites, merchants, and visitors may have occupied the same space while understanding the performance through different traditions. The gymnasium is equally important. In the Greek world, a gymnasium is not simply a place for exercise. It is where young men train physically, study language and philosophy, form social connections, and learn what membership in the civic community is supposed to mean. At Ai-Khanoum, the gymnasium is unusually large, suggesting that education and Greek identity receive substantial institutional support. An inscription preserves the names of men associated with the building, evidence that civic prestige still matters even under monarchy. One of the city's most famous discoveries is a stone inscription containing moral maxims associated with the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi. The text advises moderation, self-control, respect for parents, and dignity in old age. It appears to have been copied and transported across the Hellenistic world before being set up in this distant city. The journey of those words is striking. teachings linked to a sacred centre in Greece stand beside rivers flowing towards Central Asia, reminding residents that they belong to a cultural tradition stretching far beyond the horizon. But Ai-Khanoum is not culturally pure, and it was never meant to be. Its temples do not follow only familiar Greek designs. One major sanctuary has thick walls and a raised platform more characteristic of Near Eastern architecture. The identity of the deity worshipped there remains uncertain. A damaged sculpture suggests a divine figure, but scholars still debate whether the cult was Greek, Iranian, local, or deliberately blended. Religious practice in frontier societies rarely fits neat categories. A Greek name might be applied to a local god because the two shared certain qualities, while rituals continued in forms inherited from the region. This process is sometimes described as cultural fusion, but the reality is more uneven. Traditions do not simply melt into one harmonious whole. Communities preserve distinctions, compete for influence, and adapt at different speeds. Greek language dominates official inscriptions and royal coinage, revealing who controls public authority. Local languages, most of which leave fewer written traces, continue in homes, villages, markets, and religious settings. Iranian elites may adopt Greek titles or artistic styles without abandoning older identities. Greek settlers may participate in local customs because survival requires cooperation. The city's houses reveal another level of this mixed world. Some contain central courtyards, storage areas, reception rooms, and private spaces arranged according to both Greek and regional practices. Imported luxury goods appear beside locally produced pottery. Decorative fragments show Mediterranean motifs, while construction methods respond to Central Asian conditions. Daily life does not follow the clean boundaries suggested by royal ideology. Even food tells the story. Grapes are cultivated, wine is produced, and olive oil may be imported or substituted with local oils. Wheat and barley remain staples, but residents also consume foods shaped by the agricultural traditions of Bactria. Soldiers and merchants bring new tastes. Local cooks adapt them. A banquet in a Greek household might include vessels made by regional craftsmen, ingredients grown along Bactrian canals, and guests whose ancestors came from several different worlds. A lesser-known discovery from Ai-Khanoum is a fragment of a sundial designed for use at a latitude different from the city's own. It may have been imported from farther west or copied from an unsuitable model. If so, it offers a small but revealing image of transplantation, a scientific instrument carried across continents, impressive in concept, yet not perfectly adjusted to the sky beneath which it now stands. Much of Greek Bactria is like that sundial. Institutions are transferred, but the environment changes their function. The city flourishes because the kingdom is confident enough to invest in stone, education, ceremony, and administration. Its residents can look at theatres and columns and believe that Greek civilization has not merely survived beyond the Hindu Kush, but expanded. Still, the evidence remains incomplete. No surviving text explains exactly who founded Ai-Khanoum, how its population was divided, or what most inhabitants called the city. Archaeology provides streets, walls, inscriptions, and objects, but not the full voices of those who lived there. What the ruins make clear is that the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom is no accidental remnant of Alexander's invasion. It possesses urban ambition on a royal scale. From cities like Ai-Khanoum, kings govern fertile valleys, reward loyal followers, train new generations, and claim a place in the wider Hellenistic world. Yet monumental cities require security, and security depends on rulers strong enough to control armies and borders. The first dynasty has established independence, but another family is about to seize the throne and turn Bactria into something even more formidable. Power in Bactria is measured in distance, grain, horses, and metal. A king may claim descent from Macedonian conquerors, but his throne survives only if soldiers are paid, roads remain open, and the harvest reaches royal storehouses. The rulers who follow Diodotus understand this with unusual clarity. They inherit a kingdom rich enough to tempt every neighbour, and remote enough to encourage every ambitious governor. Their answer is expansion. Bactria will not remain a defensive refuge beyond the Hindu Kush. It will become a centre from which power moves outward. The dynasty of Diodotus ends when Euthydemus seizes the throne, probably in the late 3rd century BCE. The precise circumstances are obscure. Later sources describe him as a native of Magnesia, though even that identification is debated, and almost nothing certain is known about his rise. He may have served as a regional governor before overthrowing Diodotus III. He may have gained support from military settlers, Bactrian elites, or communities dissatisfied with the previous king's alliance with Parthia. The evidence remains incomplete, but the outcome is unmistakable. A new family takes control, and the kingdom begins to project an image of greater confidence. Euthydemus appears on his coins as a mature, forceful ruler. His face is not idealized into youthful perfection. The heavy features, strong jaw, and deep lines suggest experience and endurance. Hellenistic portraiture often uses realism as political theatre. A king's worn face can imply that he has earned authority through hardship. The portrait travels farther than the king himself, passing through markets, military camps, tax offices, and caravan stations. Each coin repeats the same message. This is the man whose silver is trusted and whose soldiers enforce its value. The silver coin becomes one of the kingdom's most effective tools. Bactrian mints produce tetradrachms of high artistic quality, often showing the ruler on one side and a divine figure on the other. Heracles, Zeus, the Dioscuri, and other familiar Greek deities appear as symbols of strength, legitimacy, and protection. Yet the metal beneath these images comes from an Asian economy. Mines, tribute, captured wealth, and trade supply the silver. Local craftsmen may cut dies according to Greek conventions, while merchants carry the finished coins through regions where Greek is not the language of daily life. Coinage also reveals instability. New kings frequently overstrike older money, placing their own designs over the images of defeated rivals. A faint outline beneath a later portrait can preserve a political struggle otherwise lost to history. Rulers disappear from written sources yet survive in these layers of stamped metal. Some are known from only a handful of coins, and scholars still debate whether they ruled all Bactria, a single city, or merely claimed a throne they never securely possessed. The kingdom's wealth rests first on agriculture. Bactria's irrigated plains produce grain in quantities sufficient to support cities and armies. Vineyards, orchards, and herds add further value. Royal officials depend on canals maintained by generations of local labour. If irrigation fails, urban life contracts quickly. The kings therefore rule not only through cavalry and fortresses, but through control of water, administrators who measure land, organise repairs, and collect produce can be as important to survival as generals. Horses remain another foundation of power. Bactrian cavalry combines the traditions of the Iranian world with Hellenistic military organisation. Mounted archers, lancers, and armoured horsemen give the kings mobility across open country. Greek infantry and mercenaries still matter, especially in sieges and set battles. But no ruler beyond the Hindu Kush can rely on the phalanx alone. The landscape rewards armies able to scout widely, strike quickly, and respond to raids from the steppe. War elephants may also appear in royal forces, especially as Bactria's connections with India deepen. These animals are expensive to maintain and difficult to move through mountainous terrain, but their presence carries enormous psychological and political weight. A king who commands elephants presents himself as ruler of a world larger than the old Macedonian frontier. The animals embody access to Indian resources and the ability to combine different military traditions. Trade strengthens this ambition. Bactrian merchants and royal agents stand between the Iranian plateau, the steppe, and the Indian subcontinent. Caravans move textiles, spices, precious stones, ivory, metals, horses, and luxury objects. No single organised Silk Road yet links China directly to the Mediterranean in the form imagined by later centuries, but chains of exchange already carry goods across remarkable distances. A material produced in one world may pass through several languages, currencies, and political borders before reaching another. Among the strangest signs of royal wealth are the enormous gold coins associated with later Greco-Bactrian rulers. The most famous bears the name of Eucratides, whose reign belongs to a later phase of the kingdom. But it reflects a tradition of monetary display built over generations. Weighing far more than an ordinary coin, such pieces were probably ceremonial, donative, or intended for exceptional transactions rather than daily use. They are not simply currency. They are monuments small enough to hold in the hand. The kings also use titles carefully. Some call themselves Sota, meaning saviour. Others adopt titles implying greatness, victory, or divine favour. These words do not necessarily describe how subjects experience their rule. They are claims made in a competitive political language shared across the Hellenistic world. Every king must prove that he protects cities, defeats enemies, rewards followers, and enjoys the support of the gods. Failure invites rebellion. Bactria's prosperity therefore carries a permanent contradiction. Wealth pays for walls and armies, but it also attracts invasion. Strong governors can defend the frontier, but they can also become rivals to the crown. Expansion brings tribute and prestige, yet stretches communication across even greater distances. The kingdom grows because standing still is dangerous, but every new territory creates another border. Under Euthydemus, Bactria appears strong enough to survive its first dynasty and absorb the shock of usurpation. The new king controls a treasury, productive farmland, cavalry, fortified cities, and mints capable of broadcasting his authority. From the outside, the kingdom may look secure, yet far to the west, a Seleucid ruler is restoring imperial power and turning his attention toward the provinces that broke away. Antiochus III intends to prove that the eastern kingdoms are not beyond his reach. Bactria's silver, soldiers, and royal confidence are about to be tested against one of the largest armies in Asia. Antiochus III approaches Bactria as a king repairing a broken empire when he inherited the Seleucid throne. Rebellions, rival dynasties, and lost provinces had reduced the authority of his family across much of Asia. He spends years restoring control in the west and suppressing internal challenges before turning toward the eastern lands that had declared independence. His campaign is not merely a raid for treasure. It is an attempt to rebuild the world of Seleucus and prove that no governor can become a king simply because mountains and deserts stand between him and the royal court. By 209 BCE, Antiochus has already forced his way through Parthian territory. The Arsacid rulers resist, withdraw, and negotiate, surviving without fully stopping him. Beyond Parthia lies Bactria, wealthier, more urbanized, and ruled by Euthydemus, the usurper whose coins present him as a legitimate monarch. Antiochus cannot tolerate that claim without challenge. If Euthydemus remains independent, every distant governor in the Seleucid Empire may see rebellion as a path to royalty. The invading army reaches the river Areius, probably the modern Hari River, where Euthydemus has placed a large force of cavalry to block the crossing. The exact numbers given by ancient writers may be exaggerated, but Bactrian strength clearly lies in mounted troops. The river offers a natural defensive line. If Euthydemus can prevent Antiochus from crossing, the Seleucid army may be delayed until supply shortages. Heat and distance make retreat necessary. Antiochus studies the Bactrian routine. The cavalry guards the crossing during the day, then withdraws at night to a nearby settlement. Before dawn, the Seleucid king moves selected troops toward the river and begins crossing while the bank is lightly defended. When the Bactrian horsemen return, they find an enemy bridgehead already forming. A violent battle follows along the river, where cavalry charges collide in confined ground, and Antiochus reportedly fights near the front. Ancient accounts praise his personal courage and describe a horse being killed beneath him, while he receives wounds to the mouth. Such details belong partly to the traditional image of the warrior king, and scholars still debate how much has been shaped by royal propaganda. Yet the engagement appears to have been genuinely severe. The Seleucids eventually forced the Bactrian cavalry back, allowing the rest of their army to cross. Euthydemus loses the river line and retreats toward his capital. The city usually identified as Bactra stands near modern Balkh, one of the oldest and most important urban centres in the region. Later writers remember it as a place of extraordinary wealth, though centuries of occupation make its Hellenistic layers difficult to reconstruct. Its walls, population, and supplies offer Euthydemus a better chance of survival than another open battle. Antiochus surrounds the city and begins what becomes a prolonged siege. For the attackers, the greatest enemy may be time. A siege so far from the Seleucid heartlands requires an immense flow of grain, fodder, weapons, replacement animals, and money. Every supply convoy crosses territory that may not be fully secure. The Bactrians understand their own environment, possess nearby supporters, and can hope that the invading army will eventually exhaust itself. Antiochus can win battles, but holding position for months or years is a different kind of warfare. The siege reportedly continues for 2 years. The surviving sources provide few details of assaults, engineering works, or conditions inside the city, leaving much of the struggle hidden. There may have been repeated attacks against the walls, efforts to cut supply routes, and negotiations conducted while fighting continued. No single account fully explains how Bactria endured so long, but the duration itself reveals the resources available to Euthydemus. This is no fragile rebel government waiting to collapse at the sight of an imperial army. As the siege drags on, both rulers face uncomfortable realities. Antiochus has demonstrated that he can reach Bactria and defeat its army in the field, yet he cannot easily destroy the kingdom without spending years in the east. Euthydemus has defended his capital, but the surrounding countryside suffers, trade is disrupted, and his authority may weaken if the war continues indefinitely. Victory in the absolute sense becomes less valuable than an agreement both sides can present as honourable. Euthydemus sends his son Demetrius to negotiate. The young prince makes a strong impression on Antiochus, who sees in him the appearance and bearing expected of a royal heir. The negotiations turn on legitimacy. Euthydemus argues that he is not the original rebel against Seleucid authority. He overthrew the descendants of Diodotus, the dynasty that first separated Bactria from the empire. He presents himself not as a treacherous governor, but as the ruler who brought stability after earlier rebellion. More importantly, he warns Antiochus about the nomadic peoples gathering along the northern frontier. If Bactria is destroyed by continued war, he argues, the defences of settled Central Asia will collapse, and the region may fall to groups from the steppe. This is both a practical warning and a diplomatic strategy. Euthydemus casts his kingdom as a protective barrier rather than a stolen province. His soldiers, cities, and cavalry become part of a wider defence benefiting the Seleucid world. Antiochus accepts the logic because it offers him what he most needs, recognition of superiority without the cost of complete conquest. Euthydemus is allowed to retain the royal title. A marriage is arranged between Demetrius and one of Antiochus's daughters. Binding the dynasties through kinship, Euthydemus provides supplies and war elephants, while Antiochus ends the siege and continues eastward before eventually turning back toward the west. Both kings can claim success. Antiochus has crossed the eastern satrapies, defeated Bactrian forces, and compelled a rival to negotiate. His reputation as the great king is strengthened. Euthydemus has survived the invasion, preserved his dynasty, and received recognition from the very empire that sought to remove him. What began as a rebellion has become an accepted monarchy. The agreement transforms Bactria's position. It no longer appears merely as a province temporarily beyond imperial control. It stands as an independent kingdom whose ruler has faced the Seleucid army and remained on the throne. Demetrius emerges from the negotiations as the heir to a secure dynasty, connected by marriage to one of the most prestigious royal houses of the Hellenistic age. With the western threat reduced, the kingdom's attention can turn elsewhere. Beyond the southern mountains, political change is weakening the Mauryan world of India. Roads once used by Alexander's soldiers remain open through the Hindu Kush. Euthydemus has defended Bactria. His son will use its strength to cross the mountains and begin a far more ambitious expansion. The road into India begins as a descent through stone. South of Bactria, the Hindu Kush rises in steep ridges cut by narrow valleys, where armies move slowly and every animal consumes supplies that must be carried over the same difficult ground. Alexander had crossed these mountains generations earlier, but the world below has changed. The Mauryan Empire, which once dominated much of the Indian subcontinent, is weakening after the reign of Ashoka. Regional rulers compete for territory. Frontier provinces become vulnerable, and the political balance that had contained Greek power beyond the mountains begins to break apart. Demetrius, son of Euthydemus, inherits more than a defended kingdom. He inherits experienced cavalry, fortified cities, a productive agricultural base, and the prestige of having negotiated face-to-face with Antiochus III. His father's survival gives the dynasty legitimacy. His own ambition gives it direction. At some point in the early 2nd century BCE, probably around the 190s or 180s, Demetrius leads forces southward across the Hindu Kush and into the lands connecting Afghanistan with the northwestern Indian subcontinent. The exact sequence of his campaigns remains uncertain. Ancient literary sources mention them only briefly, and the coins do not provide a complete chronology. Scholars still debate which territories Demetrius personally conquered, which were taken by his generals, and how far his authority extended. Some reconstructions give him a vast realm reaching deep into northern India. Others place greater emphasis on later Indo-Greek rulers. What survives in the record suggests a sustained movement rather than a single dramatic invasion. The first objectives are likely the old frontier regions of Arachosia, Parapamisadai, and Gandhara. These lands occupy the corridors between Bactria and the Indus, including major centres near modern Kandahar, Kabul, and Peshawar. They are culturally and politically complex. Iranian traditions remain strong in some districts, while Indian languages, Buddhist communities, local dynasties, and memories of earlier Persian and Macedonian rule overlap. A Greek army entering this region is not stepping from one civilization into another at a clear border. It is moving through a zone that has connected worlds for centuries. Demetrius appears on some coins wearing an elephant scalp headdress. The image follows Hellenistic traditions associated with conquest in India, but it carries special weight here. The elephant marks him as a king whose power crosses the mountains. It suggests victory, access to Indian territories, and perhaps command of war elephants. The portrait transforms geography into royal identity. Demetrius is no longer simply king of Bactria. He presents himself as a ruler of both sides of the Hindu Kush. His armies are probably as mixed as the lands they invade. Greek and Macedonian-style infantry may form part of the force, but Bactrian and Iranian cavalry are essential. Local recruits, mercenaries, mountain troops, and elephants add further variety. Orders pass through interpreters and officers familiar with several languages. The army carries Greek royal symbols, yet much of its practical strength comes from traditions developed in Central Asia and India. Control of Gandhara offers strategic and economic advantages. The region commands routes linking the Kabul Valley to the Indus Plain and contains wealthy cities that have already experienced centuries of long-distance exchange. Taxila is the most famous, located near major roads. It functions as a political, commercial, and intellectual centre rather than a single isolated settlement. Greek rulers who control Taxila gain access to Indian merchants, craft production, agricultural wealth, and routes leading farther east. Conquest does not necessarily mean destruction. Some cities may resist, while others negotiate. Local rulers can retain authority under Greek kings in return for tribute and military support. Administrators familiar with Indian taxation and landholding remain useful. Buddhist monasteries continue to receive donations. Existing coinage systems are adapted rather than simply abolished. Successful rule depends less on replacing the region's institutions than on placing a new dynasty above them. The political weakness that encourages Demetrius may be connected to the collapse of Mauryan power. Around the middle of the 2nd century BCE, Pushyamitra Shunga overthrows the last Mauryan ruler and establishes a new dynasty in northern India. Dating the Greek advance against these events is difficult, and later traditions are not always reliable. Some sources depict conflict between Greek forces and Indian kingdoms, but identifying commanders and locations remains controversial. No single explanation fully accounts for the speed or extent of Indo-Greek expansion. Later Indian texts refer to Yavanas, a term derived from Ionians and used broadly for Greeks or Western foreigners. These references show that Greek military activity left an impression, but they do not provide a simple campaign narrative. In some traditions, Yavanna forces threaten important cities in the Gangetic Plain. Whether these accounts describe Demetrius, another Greek ruler, or memories of several invasions combined together is still debated. The possibility that Greek armies advanced far beyond the Indus is real, but the evidence is uneven. Even limited conquests create a serious problem for the Bactrian Kingdom. The new territories lie south of some of the most difficult mountains in Eurasia. A ruler cannot supervise Bactra, Gandhara, Arachosia, and Indian cities from one court without delegating authority. Princes and generals receive armies, mints, and provinces. These men defend the dynasty, but they also acquire the tools required to become kings themselves. Coinage begins to reflect the new political environment. In India, Greek rulers increasingly produce bilingual coins. Greek inscriptions appear on one side, while Prakrit written in the Kharosthi script appears on the other. Deities and symbols familiar to Indian populations join Hellenistic images. Square coins, common in local monetary traditions, appear beside round Greek forms. Royal authority learns to speak in more than one visual and linguistic language. This adaptation is not an act of cultural generosity alone. It is necessary government. A coin must be accepted by merchants who cannot read Greek. A king must be recognized by soldiers and taxpayers whose traditions do not begin with Alexander. The bilingual issues reveal the limits of conquest more clearly than monuments do. Greek rulers can defeat armies, but they cannot govern India as though it were an empty extension of Bactria. Demetrius's expansion may represent the high point of Euthydamid ambition, yet it also begins the division of the kingdom. Some rulers operate primarily in Bactria, others south of the Hindu Kush. Their reigns overlap, their family relationships are uncertain, and rival mints produce competing portraits. The farther the dynasty advances, the more difficult unity becomes. Still, the crossing changes Eurasian history. Greek kings now rule substantial populations in the northwestern Indian world. Their coins carry Greek gods beside Indian scripts. Their courts attract merchants, monks, soldiers, and diplomats from several civilizations. The frontier created by Alexander has become something larger and stranger, a chain of kingdoms in which political power moves through mountains, and identities that once seemed separated by continents begin to share the same streets. South of the Hindu Kush, Greek rule enters a world too populous, too old, and too deeply organized to be remade in the image of a distant Mediterranean homeland. The cities of Gandhara and the Punjab already possess their own merchants, landholders, religious communities, scribes, artisans, and political traditions. Greek kings can place their portraits on coins and soldiers at city gates, but the rhythms of daily life continue through institutions that long predate their arrival. Government survives because the conquerors learn to work through those institutions rather than attempting to erase them. This is where the kingdom becomes most difficult to describe. It is tempting to imagine two civilizations meeting and gradually blending into a single new culture. The archaeological record suggests something more complicated. Greek and local traditions overlap, borrow from one another, and sometimes remain deliberately separate. A ruler may use Greek language in his court while issuing money in an Indian script. A city may contain Hellenistic architectural details beside houses built according to local customs. A Buddhist donor may carry a Greek name without abandoning the religious world of India. Cultural exchange takes place, but it does not require everyone to become the same. Coinage provides the clearest evidence. In Bactria, Greek inscriptions are usually sufficient because the royal system grows from Hellenistic foundations. In India, kings increasingly issue bilingual money. The Greek side gives the ruler's name and title in the language of the dynasty. The reverse repeats the message in Prakrit, commonly written in Kharosthi, a script read from right to left, and descended from the administrative traditions of the old Persian Empire. The same king therefore appears within two systems of political meaning. The translation is not always exact. Greek royal titles carry associations developed through the Hellenistic monarchies, while their Prakrit equivalents must make sense to Indian subjects. The coin does not merely reproduce words, it negotiates legitimacy. A merchant in a Gandharan market does not need to identify with Greek civic culture to recognize the authority stamped into the silver. A Greek soldier can read one side, an Indian trader the other, and both can accept the coin as payment. The shapes also change. Round coins remain common, but square and rectangular pieces appear because these forms are familiar in the Indian monetary world. Some rulers place Greek gods such as Zeus, Athena, Heracles, or the Dioscuri on their issues. Others use elephants, bulls, wheels, palms, and animals carrying local associations. The symbols can speak differently to different viewers. An elephant may represent India, military strength, royal power, or religious significance depending on who sees it. Administration must be equally flexible. Greek officials cannot directly manage every village, field, tax district, and caravan route. Local scribes continue to record transactions. Regional elites collect revenue, settle disputes, and provide troops. Cities may preserve councils or civic institutions associated with Greek settlement, while surrounding rural communities operate through older forms of authority. The monarchy sits above a layered system in which power is shared unequally, but rarely exercised through Greeks alone. Language follows the same pattern. Greek remains the language of royal prestige and parts of urban administration. It connects the Eastern kingdoms to the broader Hellenistic world and provides a shared identity for military settlers. Prakrit languages dominate across much of the Indian territories, while Iranian languages continue north and west of the mountains. Other local tongues survive without leaving extensive written evidence. Markets must have been filled with interpreters. Mixed vocabularies, and speakers shifting from one language to another according to circumstance. Even names reveal movement between identities. A person with a Greek name may belong to a family established in Asia for generations. Another individual may adopt a Greek name for military or administrative service, while keeping local religious ties. Greek settlers marry into regional families, though the scale of intermarriage remains impossible to measure. Children raised in such households might hear one language in public offices, another from relatives, and still another in commercial districts. Religious life offers some of the most intriguing signs of exchange. Greek kings continue to invoke familiar gods because divine imagery supports dynastic legitimacy, yet they rule regions where Buddhism, Brahmanical traditions, local cults, and Iranian religious practices all have deep roots. There is little evidence of a systematic attempt to impose Greek religion. Temples, monasteries, shrines, and household rituals continue under changing rulers, provided they do not threaten royal authority. Some Greeks appear to participate in Buddhist life. Inscriptions from the wider Indo-Greek world preserve names associated with donors, officials, and communities whose backgrounds may have been Greek or culturally Hellenized. These traces do not prove that Greek populations converted in large numbers, but they show that religious boundaries were permeable. A soldier, merchant, or administrator could support a monastery for personal devotion, social prestige, political goodwill, or all three at once. The later development of Gandharan art is often linked to this encounter because Buddhist figures eventually appear with draped robes, naturalistic bodies, wavy hair, and other features resembling Hellenistic artistic conventions. The relationship, however, is not simple. Much of the famous Gandharan sculpture belongs to periods after the main Indo-Greek kingdoms, under later rulers and changing cultural conditions. Greek influence forms one strand among Iranian, Indian, Central Asian, and Roman-era artistic currents. Scholars still debate how directly Indo-Greek workshops contributed to the earliest human images of the Buddha. What can be seen more safely is the presence of craftsmen trained in different visual traditions. Decorative motifs such as vines, rosettes, Corinthian-style capitals, winged figures, and realistic human forms travel through workshops and trade networks. Local artists do not merely copy foreign models, they select, alter, and place them inside new religious and political settings. A form associated with Greek victory or abundance may acquire a different meaning beside a Buddhist monument. Daily life carries this exchange more quietly. In cities, Greek-style drinking vessels appear beside local ceramics. Mediterranean food customs meet Indian grains, fruits, spices, and cooking methods. Clothing varies by climate, status, occupation, and ancestry. A royal official might wear garments associated with the Greek court during public ceremonies, while using regional dress for travel. Soldiers carry weapons drawn from several military traditions. Households combine imported luxuries with objects produced by nearby artisans. The differences do not vanish. Greek settlers may guard privileges connected to military service, education, or urban citizenship. Local populations may view them as rulers rather than neighbours. Taxes, warfare, and competition for land create resentment that artistic exchange cannot dissolve. Cultural contact is not evidence of social equality. The kingdom remains a monarchy born from conquest, and its openness is shaped by political necessity. Yet necessity produces lasting consequences. The rulers discover that authority becomes stronger when it can be expressed in several languages and symbols. Their subjects discover that foreign institutions can be adapted without completely surrendering older identities. Between the Oxus and the Indus, Greekness becomes less a matter of birthplace than a flexible political and cultural vocabulary. Indian, Iranian, and Central Asian traditions remain alive beside it, changing the kingdom while resisting absorption. This unstable coexistence prepares the ground for the most famous ruler to emerge from the Indo-Greek world. His memory will survive not only on coins and in scattered historical notices, but within a Buddhist philosophical tradition that transforms a foreign king into a seeker of wisdom. Yet even there, certainty remains elusive, because the figure remembered by religion and the monarch reconstructed by historians are not perfectly the same man. Among the many kings whose portraits survive on Indo-Greek coins, one name rises above the others: Menander. His face appears in silver with the sharp profile of a Hellenistic ruler, sometimes youthful, sometimes more mature, wearing a diadem or a crested helmet. Around him runs the language of monarchy, first in Greek and then in Prakrit. To some subjects he is Menandros, king and saviour. To later Buddhist tradition he becomes Milinda, a foreign ruler remembered not primarily for conquest, but for the questions he asks. The difficulty begins with chronology. Menander probably rules during the 2nd century BCE, most likely around the middle decades, but the exact dates remain disputed. The political map has already fractured. The old unity of the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom is weakening, and several Greek kings hold different territories on either side of the Hindu Kush. Some may be relatives, others are rivals who control their own armies and mints. Menander emerges from this unstable world, but his family background is unknown. No surviving inscription records his ancestry, and ancient historians provide only brief references. His coinage suggests unusual power. Menander's silver pieces are found across a wide area, especially in the Punjab and Gandhara, indicating a realm larger and more commercially active than those of many neighbouring rulers. The volume of his money may reflect long rule, extensive taxation, military campaigns, or all three. Coins travel beyond political borders, so their distribution cannot map his kingdom precisely. But what survives in the record suggests that his authority reaches across important cities and trade routes south of the Hindu Kush. His capital is often associated with Sagala, usually identified with modern Sialkot in Pakistan. The city stands in the Punjab, a fertile region crossed by rivers and roads. Later literary tradition describes Sagala as prosperous, well defended, crowded with merchants, and adorned with parks, gardens, and public buildings. Some of these descriptions follow conventional images of the ideal ancient city, so they cannot be treated as a direct survey. Even so, the location is credible for a king whose power depends on controlling the routes linking Gandhara, the Indus, and the deeper plains of northern India. Menander's military reputation extends far beyond the evidence preserved on his coins. Greek and Roman writers remember a king named Menander as one of the most successful Greek conquerors in India. The geographer Strabo, relying on earlier sources, claims that Greek rulers after Alexander subdued more Indian peoples than Alexander himself. Menander is singled out among them. Another tradition connects Greek forces with advances toward the east, perhaps reaching the region of the Ganges. Indian sources also remember Yavana armies appearing in northern India. A grammatical text and later historical traditions refer to Greek attacks on important cities, including places near the heartland of the Gangetic kingdoms. Yet assigning these campaigns to Menander remains difficult. They may preserve memories of several invasions conducted under different rulers. The distance between the events and the surviving texts allows victories, defeats, and rumours to merge. Scholars still debate whether Menander personally led an army toward the Ganges, or whether later generations attached wider Greek expansion to his famous name. What is more certain is that he rules as an Indian king as much as a Hellenistic one. His bilingual coins do not treat local language as a decorative addition. They are designed to circulate among people whose political expectations are rooted in the subcontinent. His titles are translated, his symbols adapted, and his authority expressed through forms understood by different populations. Athena often appears on his coins, hurling a thunderbolt and carrying a shield, an image of royal protection and military success. Yet the same money bears Kharosthi writing, allowing the king's identity to cross linguistic boundaries. A particularly intriguing symbol associated with Menander is the Buddhist wheel. It appears on some bronze issues, though interpreting its meaning requires caution. The wheel can represent Buddhist teaching, royal authority, movement, or cosmic order. Its presence may indicate sympathy toward Buddhism, an attempt to appeal to Buddhist communities, or the use of a symbol whose meaning was broad enough to serve several audiences. No single image proves personal conversion. The strongest link between Menander and Buddhism comes from a text known as the Questions of King Milinda. Written in Pali and preserved within Buddhist tradition, it presents a series of conversations between King Milinda and the monk Nagasena. The king is intelligent, skeptical, and relentless. He asks how personal identity can exist if Buddhism denies a permanent soul. He asks how rebirth occurs, how memory works, and how moral responsibility survives from one life to another. Nagasena responds through comparisons and carefully structured explanations. The most famous is the image of the chariot. A chariot is not identical with its wheels, axle, frame, or reins, yet the word is used for the arrangement of those parts. In the same way, What people call a person is a temporary combination of physical and mental processes, rather than an eternal, unchanging self. The discussion is philosophical, but it is also dramatic in a quiet way. A powerful king discovers that authority cannot answer every question. Whether the historical Menander actually held such discussions is impossible to know. The text reached its surviving form over time, and parts may have been added long after his reign. The dialogue follows literary and religious purposes rather than functioning as a court transcript. Menander may have become an ideal royal questioner because the memory of a Greek king offered Buddhist authors a striking figure, an educated foreign ruler whose reason leads him toward the teachings of the Buddha. The tradition eventually portrays Melinda as accepting Buddhist doctrine and, in some versions, renouncing royal life. This cannot be confirmed historically. Menander may have supported Buddhist institutions without abandoning Greek religious customs. Ancient rulers often patronized several communities at once. A king could honor Athena on his silver, present himself through Greek royal titles, donate to Buddhist establishments, and participate in local ceremonies without seeing these actions as contradictory. A later account adds another remarkable detail. After Menander's death, cities supposedly compete for his remains. His ashes are divided and monuments are built over them, echoing stories about the distribution of the Buddha's relics. The report may be shaped by Buddhist tradition, but it suggests how deeply Menander's memory entered the religious imagination of the region. Few Hellenistic kings are remembered in this way. His death probably creates political instability. No successor clearly inherits all of his territories. A queen named Agathoclea appears on coins associated with a young ruler named Strato, perhaps governing as regent. Though her exact relationship to Menander is debated, rival kings continue to mint money across the Punjab and Gandhara. What had seemed like a powerful Indo-Greek realm fragments again into smaller monarchies. Menander's greatest legacy may therefore lie outside dynastic success. His kingdom does not endure in unified form, but his image survives across several traditions. To Greek geographers, he is a conqueror. To numismatists, he is one of the most prolific rulers of the Indo-Greek world. To Buddhist authors, he is the king who submits power to reason and asks questions until certainty begins to dissolve. Behind these different memories stands a ruler who embodies the strange possibilities created by the Greek presence beyond the Hindu Kush. He is neither simply a Macedonian conqueror nor an Indian monarch wearing foreign symbols. He belongs to the world produced between them, a world where armies, languages, religions, and ideas travel along the same roads as silver. Those roads now stretch across half a continent, carrying not only royal ambition but objects and beliefs far beyond the borders of any single kingdom. The roads that sustain the Indo-Greek kingdoms are not roads in the modern sense, and they do not form one continuous highway stretching neatly from the Mediterranean to China. They are chains of river valleys, mountain passes, caravan tracks, ferry crossings, market towns, and guarded sections of royal road. A merchant rarely travels from one end of Eurasia to the other. Goods move in stages, changing owners many times, passing through languages and currencies that their original makers may never have heard. The Greek kingdoms beyond the Hindu Kush prosper because they occupy several of the most important links in this long and uneven system. From Bactria, routes run west through Parthia toward Iran, Mesopotamia, and the eastern Mediterranean northward. Paths cross the Oxus and enter Sogdiana, where oasis settlements connect agricultural lands with the open steppe, eastward. Difficult corridors lead toward the Tarim Basin and the fringes of the Chinese world. Southward, the passes of the Hindu Kush descend into Gandhara and the Indus Valley, from which roads spread across northern India or continue toward ports on the Arabian Sea. A ruler who controls Bactria and Gandhara therefore stands between several economic zones without fully belonging to any one of them. The landscape makes movement difficult enough to be valuable. High passes may close beneath winter snow. Desert crossings require careful knowledge of wells. Rivers change course, and floods can destroy bridges or roads. Bandits, local wars, and political tolls add further danger. Caravans respond by moving in groups, hiring guards, and relying on guides whose knowledge may be inherited within families. Pack animals vary according to terrain. Horses and mules serve on mountain roads. Oxen pull heavier loads in fertile plains, and camels become increasingly important across dry regions. The most famous later name for this network, the Silk Road, can create the false impression that silk is already the single purpose of continental exchange. During the height of Greek Bactria, Chinese silk may be reaching Central Asia in limited quantities, but the great expansion of direct connections associated with the Han dynasty belongs partly to the period when the Greek kingdom is beginning to fracture. Even so, Bactria is positioned to benefit from older networks already carrying precious materials, animals, textiles, and ideas across enormous distances. Lapis lazuli remains one of the region's most ancient exports. Mined in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan, the stone has been valued since prehistoric times for its intense blue colour. It travels west to royal workshops and religious centres, where craftsmen grind it into pigment or set it into jewellery. Other stones, including turquoise and varieties of quartz, pass through similar routes. From India come ivory, spices, fine cotton textiles, aromatic substances, pearls, and luxury goods whose exact identities are sometimes difficult to reconstruct from ancient descriptions. Bactria contributes horses of exceptional reputation. Central Asian animals are prized by armies and royal courts, and the trade in horses becomes both an economic activity and an instrument of diplomacy. A king may send horses as gifts, demand them as tribute, or restrict their sale to enemies. War elephants move in the opposite direction from India, though transporting them through mountain terrain requires enormous effort. They are less practical merchandise than mobile symbols of alliance and military prestige. Wine, grain, oils, metalwork, pottery, and manufactured objects circulate over shorter distances. Most trade is regional rather than transcontinental. The daily economy of a Bactrian city depends more on nearby farms, workshops, and markets than on rare goods from distant empires. Yet long-distance luxury trade enriches courts and merchants disproportionately. A small quantity of gemstones or spices can carry immense value compared with its weight, making it suitable for dangerous journeys. Coins help reveal these connections, although they must be interpreted cautiously. Greek and Indo-Greek money appears far from the mints where it was produced. Some coins travel through commerce, while others are carried by soldiers, migrants, diplomats, or raiders. A coin discovered in a distant region does not prove direct political control, but clusters of finds can suggest repeated contact. The high silver content of many Bactrian issues makes them attractive even where the king's portrait means little. Metal can cross borders more easily than royal authority. The rulers understand the political importance of trusted currency. Standardized coins allow taxes to be collected, troops to be paid, and merchants to compare value across markets. Bilingual issues south of the Hindu Kush extend this trust across linguistic boundaries. Countermarks and overstrikes show that coins remain useful even after dynasties change. A new ruler may stamp his symbol onto older money rather than withdrawing every piece, preserving economic continuity while declaring political replacement. Markets along these roads become meeting places for people who may share no language. Greek merchants encounter Iranian caravan leaders, Indian bankers, Sogdian intermediaries, nomadic horse traders, and local farmers. Agreements rely on interpreters, established weights, witnessed contracts, and personal reputation. Religious institutions may also assist travellers by providing lodging, storage, or trusted social connections. Monasteries and temples are not merely spiritual spaces. In prosperous regions, they can become part of the economic landscape. Ideas move with the same people. Buddhist teachings travel northwest from India into Gandhara and Central Asia. Greek artistic forms move eastward and are adapted by local workshops. Iranian religious concepts spread through communities that cross political borders. Medical knowledge, astronomical methods, military techniques, and stories circulate without leaving clear records of every stage. It is often impossible to identify who carried a particular idea or when it first crossed the mountains. Cultural transmission rarely announces itself with the precision of a royal inscription. One surprising trace of these exchanges appears in the movement of artistic motifs. Images of winged figures, grapevines, sea creatures, and classical architectural ornaments appear in settings far removed from their Mediterranean origins. Their meanings change as they travel. A decorative figure associated with Greek mythology may be used beside a Buddhist monument by an artisan who values its visual power more than its original story. Borrowing does not require full understanding. A misunderstanding can itself become creative. The kingdoms profit by protecting and taxing movement, but they can also damage it. Civil wars divide roads between rival kings, armies seize pack animals and food. A city that changes hands may be looted by the same soldiers who once defended its market. Trade is resilient because merchants seek alternative routes, yet political fragmentation raises costs and weakens royal revenue. The prosperity of Bactria depends on stability across lands no Bactrian king can fully control. Far beyond the northern frontier, migrations are beginning to reshape Central Asia. Pressure among nomadic confederations pushes groups westward from the borders of China. Their movement will eventually collide with the settled kingdoms around the Oxus. The same open routes that carry horses, silver, monks, and merchants can carry entire populations under pressure. Bactria's place at the centre of exchange has made it wealthy, but roads do not choose what travels upon them. Soon they will bring forces no Greek king can tax, redirect, or safely ignore. Beyond the Oxus, the northern horizon does not belong to the Greek kings, it belongs to movement. Grasslands extend across enormous distances, broken by rivers, deserts, low mountains, and seasonal pastures. Communities here do not depend on fixed cities in the same way as the farmers of Bactria. Many travel with herds, shifting between grazing grounds according to weather and water. Their political alliances can form quickly, dissolve suddenly, and reappear under new leaders, to settled rulers. This world often appears unstable. In reality, it follows its own patterns of kinship, trade, warfare, and survival. Bactrian kings have dealt with northern peoples from the beginning. They hire steppe horsemen, exchange goods with them, negotiate access to pastures, and defend river crossings against raids. Nomads are not permanent enemies of the cities. They sell horses, livestock, hides, and captured goods. Some enter royal armies as mercenaries. Others settle near agricultural zones or serve local rulers. The boundary between mobile and settled life remains porous. Yet when large populations begin moving under pressure, ordinary frontier diplomacy becomes insufficient. The first signs of danger may not look dramatic. Merchants report unfamiliar groups appearing farther west. Pastoral communities arrive in regions already occupied by others. Raiding increases along exposed settlements. Local chiefs request military assistance or suddenly refuse tribute. A movement beginning thousands of kilometers away can reach Bactria through a sequence of displacements, with one confederation pushing another from its grazing lands, which then presses against a third. Chinese historical sources provide part of the wider story. They describe a people called the Yuezhi living northwestern China before being attacked by the Xiongnu, a powerful steppe confederation. Defeated and driven westward, the Yuezhi began a long migration across Central Asia. The chronology and precise routes remain debated, partly because Chinese accounts were compiled from reports reaching the imperial court through travellers and envoys. Still, they preserve an important pattern. Upheaval in the eastern steppe sends new populations toward the lands north of Bactria. The Yuezhi do not move through empty territory. Their westward migration collides with other peoples, including groups commonly associated with the Saka, known to Greek writers more broadly as Scythians. These names conceal considerable diversity. Ancient authors often apply a single label to many mobile communities with related lifestyles, but different leaders and identities. Archaeology reveals shared features in weapons, horse equipment, burial customs, and animal style art. Yet it cannot always match a particular grave or settlement to a name preserved in a text. The Saka themselves move south and west under pressure. Some enter regions around the Jaxartes River, others turn toward Bactria, Arachosia, and the Iranian Plateau. Later, parts of the subcontinent will contain territories remembered as lands of the Sakas. This movement is not one invasion led by a single king. It unfolds across decades, involving battles, alliances, migrations, and gradual settlement. Some groups raid and depart, others seize land, take control of routes, or enter the service of existing rulers before replacing them. For the Greco-Bactrian kings, the northern frontier has always required vigilance, but their political position is now weaker than it was under Euthydemus. Expansion into India has divided royal attention. Princes, generals, and rival dynasties control separate territories. Mints produce coins in the names of competing rulers, each claiming legitimacy through divine symbols and royal titles. Armies that might have guarded the Oxus are drawn southward into conflicts over the Punjab, Gandhara, and the mountain passes. One of the most disruptive figures is Eucratides, who seizes power in Bactria during the 2nd century BCE. His origins remain uncertain. He may have been connected to the Seleucid court, a Bactrian commander, or a member of a rival Greek family. His coins portray him in a heroic helmet decorated with bull's horns and ears, emphasizing military strength. He adopts the title the Great, a claim suggesting that his rise involves more than a peaceful inheritance. Eucratides appears to overthrow or displace rulers connected with the Euthydemed dynasty. Civil war follows, though the surviving sequence is difficult to reconstruct. Some evidence suggests that he campaigned south of the Hindu Kush against Indo-Greek rivals while attempting to preserve control of Bactria. Ancient tradition claims that he is once trapped with a small force by a vastly larger Indian army and escapes after a long siege. The numbers are probably exaggerated, but the story reflects a reign dominated by military struggle. His enormous gold coin, one of the largest surviving gold pieces from antiquity, presents royal power at its most confident. Yet the scale of the coin contrasts with the instability of the kingdom. Monumental money cannot close a frontier or reconcile competing dynasties. It may even represent the concentration of wealth in royal hands during a period when political authority is narrowing. A later account gives Eucratides a violent death. Returning from India, he is murdered by his own son, who drives a chariot through the king's blood and leaves the body unburied. The story is so theatrical that caution is necessary. Ancient historians often shape dynastic murder into moral drama. Whether every detail is true or not, Eucratides does disappear amid succession struggles, and the kingdom appears increasingly divided after him. This internal conflict is disastrous because frontier defense depends on coordination. A fortified city can resist a raid, but not endless pressure without support from neighbouring districts. Irrigation settlements require farmers to remain on the land. If repeated attacks force them behind walls or drive them away, canals deteriorate and harvests shrink. Royal tax income falls at the very moment armies require more money. Soldiers who are not paid may change allegiance, plunder the countryside, or offer their services to another king. Nomadic warfare exploits these weaknesses. Mounted archers can avoid slow infantry, cut supply lines, and attack dispersed settlements. Steppe armies do not always need to capture massive walls immediately. They can isolate a city by controlling the countryside around it. They seize livestock, disrupt planting, and prevent caravans from arriving. A kingdom based on irrigated islands of settlement is vulnerable when the spaces between those islands become unsafe. Yet the confrontation is not simply a contest between destructive nomads and civilized Greeks. Mobile peoples also seek access to farmland, markets, tribute, and political legitimacy. Once they enter Bactria, many will adopt existing administrative practices and coinage. They may preserve Greek symbols because local merchants recognize them, or employ officials who served earlier kings. Conquest transforms the newcomers as surely as it transforms the conquered. The Yuezhi eventually reach the region north of the Oxus, displacing or absorbing groups already present. Chinese envoys later describe them as prosperous and divided among several principalities. From these communities will emerge the Kushan Empire, one of the most important powers in later Central and South Asian history. But that future still lies beyond the immediate crisis. For the Greek rulers, the danger is closer. Saka groups press into southern territories. Other peoples, including the Yuezhi, and possibly groups identified as Tocharians in classical sources, alter the balance north of the river. Scholars still debate which population was responsible for each stage of Bactria's conquest, because written accounts are brief, and names do not align neatly across Greek, Latin, Chinese, and archaeological evidence. What is clear is that the kingdom now faces pressure from every direction while divided against itself. The cities remain wealthy, the mints still strike silver, and Greek kings continue to wear the diadem. But beyond the walls, the roads are becoming less reliable. The northern grasslands are no longer a distant frontier. They are moving toward the heart of Bactria. The end of the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom does not arrive in a single final battle. No surviving historian records the day when the last Greek ruler loses Bactria. No inscription announces the surrender of the Oxus frontier, and no ruined palace preserves the name of the conqueror who first entered its halls. The kingdom fades through overlapping defeats, migrations, dynastic murders, abandoned cities, and political transformations that unfold across several generations. Its disappearance is one of the reasons it later seems almost unreal. A state powerful enough to challenge the Seleucids and invade India slips out of written history without leaving a clear account of its death. By the middle of the 2nd century BCE, Bactria has already been weakened by civil war. Rival kings strike coins in the same regions, overtake one another's mints, and attempt to hold territories divided by mountains and hostile roads. The dynasty of Euthydemus has fragmented, Eucratides has risen through violence, and Greek rulers south of the Hindu Kush increasingly operate independently. The political world that once connected Bactria to the Punjab is no longer a single kingdom. It is a chain of competing monarchies, each defending a smaller portion of the old realm. This fragmentation makes the northern invasions more devastating. Classical writers describe Bactria being taken by nomadic peoples whose names vary from source to source. The Asi, Passiani, Toshari, and Sakarauli appear in different accounts, but matching these labels with the Yuezhi, Sakar, or other archaeological populations remains difficult. Ancient authors were often reporting events from great distance, using names that could refer to confederations, subgroups, or temporary alliances. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single reconstruction fully accounts for the sequence of conquest. The first losses may have occurred along the northern banks of the Oxus, where exposed settlements and river crossings were difficult to defend. Once mobile forces controlled the countryside, fortified cities became isolated. A king could hold walls while losing the fields, villages, and roads that fed them. Caravans changed routes. Farmers fled or accepted new protectors. Garrisons began to depend on supplies they could no longer reliably obtain. Political collapse did not necessarily begin when a city was stormed. It began when the city ceased to command the world beyond its gates. Ai-Khanoum appears to have met a violent end sometime around the middle of the 2nd century BCE. Archaeologists found traces of destruction, looting, and abandonment, though the precise attackers remain uncertain. The palace was stripped, public buildings damaged, and valuable objects removed. Some people may have remained in parts of the settlement for a time, but the city never recovered its former urban life. The theatre fell silent. The gymnasium where Greek education had been maintained became a ruin. The moral maxims carried from Delphi survived only as broken stones beneath collapsed structures. The destruction of Ai-Khanoum is often treated as a symbol of the entire kingdom's fall, but it may have been only one episode in a larger crisis. Some cities were attacked. Others were gradually abandoned as political and economic conditions shifted. Still others continued under new rulers, preserving parts of the old administrative system. Conquest rarely erases an urban population overnight. Officials change allegiance, soldiers enter new service, craftsmen adapt their work, and merchants accept coins bearing unfamiliar names. Bactria itself likely survived because its location remained too valuable to abandon. A city controlling fertile land and major routes can outlive many dynasties. New rulers may have occupied existing fortifications and employed administrators trained under Greek kings. Greek language and coin types did not disappear immediately. In some regions, Hellenistic symbols continued because they were widely understood and economically trusted. A conqueror could gain legitimacy by placing his own name beside an image that merchants already recognized. The royal families, however, become increasingly difficult to trace. Some kings are known from a few rare coins and nothing else. Their portraits show determined faces, helmets, diadems, and divine protectors, but not the size of their territories or the manner of their deaths. A ruler may appear powerful on silver while controlling only one valley. Another may have reigned for years without producing coinage that has yet been identified. The sequence of names resembles fragments of a broken genealogy: Heliocles, Plato, Antimachus, Lysias, Zoilus, Strato, Hippostratus, and many others whose relationships remain disputed. Heliocles is often described as one of the last Greek kings to rule in Bactria itself. He may have been connected to Eucratides, perhaps as a son or successor, though certainty is impossible. His coins continue the royal language of the Hellenistic world, but by his reign the Greek heartland north of the Hindu Kush is probably shrinking. Sometime around the late 2nd century BCE, Greek political control in Bactria disappears. The surviving Indo-Greek kingdoms farther south continue for much longer, creating the misleading impression that the same state still exists. In reality, the old northern centre has been lost. The displaced Greeks do not all vanish. Some move south into Gandhara and the Punjab, carrying soldiers, administrators, artists, and royal claims into the remaining Indo-Greek territories. Others stay in Bactria under new rulers. A population does not disappear merely because its kings are overthrown. Greek-speaking communities may survive for generations, intermarrying, changing language, and adopting the customs of those who now govern them. Their descendants become increasingly difficult to identify archaeologically, because identity leaves fewer traces than coinage or architecture. South of the Hindu Kush, the Indo-Greek kings continue fighting among themselves while facing Sakka expansion. Their territories contract toward the Punjab. Some rulers form alliances with local powers, others lose cities one by one. The last Indo-Greek kingdoms probably survive into the early 1st century CE, though chronology varies. By then, the political descendants of Alexander have ruled parts of Central and South Asia for nearly 3 centuries. Their final disappearance is quieter than their arrival. There is no reverse march through the mountains, no organised return to Greece, and no moment when every Greek institution closes at once. Royal titles pass to new dynasties. Greek legends remain on coins beside Iranian and Indian names. Artistic forms survive in workshops serving Sakka, Parthian, and Kushan patrons. The conquerors are gradually absorbed into the lands they once claimed. What disappears most completely is the historical narrative. Local archives perish. Greek and Roman writers turn their attention elsewhere. Indian traditions preserve scattered memories of Yavana kings without providing a continuous chronology. Chinese sources describe the movements of peoples around Bactria, but rarely record the Greek rulers in detail. Centuries later, only coins and ruins suggest the scale of what had existed. The kingdom hidden beyond the Hindu Kush therefore ends in the same condition through which it will later be rediscovered fragments. A burned palace, a buried hoard, a royal portrait with no biography, a Greek inscription in an Afghan valley, a Buddhist text remembering a foreign king. Together they show that collapse was not one event but a long transfer of power from dynasties that could no longer defend their world to new peoples who would inherit its roads, cities, and ambitions. For centuries, the Greek kingdom beyond the Hindu Kush survives mainly as a rumour scattered across ancient texts. A few classical writers mention rich Bactrian kings, distant campaigns, and Greek armies in India, but their accounts are brief, contradictory, and often separated from the events by generations. No complete royal history remains. No local chronicle explains how the dynasties rose and fell. To later historians, the kingdom appears like a broken reflection at the edge of the known world, visible only when a surviving sentence, an unfamiliar coin, or an accidental discovery catches the light. The first clues come from money. Coins endure where parchment decays, libraries burn, and royal archives disappear. Farmers, travellers, soldiers, and treasure hunters uncover silver pieces bearing portraits in unmistakably Hellenistic style. Yet the names are unfamiliar. Some coins carry Greek inscriptions on one side and Indian writing on the other. Others show kings wearing elephant scalp headdresses, crested helmets, or the simple diadem of Macedonian monarchy. They are found not in Greece or Syria, but across Afghanistan, Pakistan, northern India, and Central Asia. Early collectors struggle to arrange them. A coin gives a face and a title, but rarely a clear date. One king may be known from dozens of issues, another from a single damaged specimen. Different rulers use the same divine symbols. The same ruler may alter his portrait and titles over time. Hoards mix coins minted decades apart, because valuable silver remains in circulation long after a king's death. Reconstructing the sequence requires comparing weight, metal, artistic style, monograms, overstrikes, and the places where coins are found. Overstrikes become especially revealing. When one king stamps his own image over the coin of another, the older portrait remains faintly visible beneath the new design. This proves that the later ruler came after the earlier one, and sometimes suggests conquest or the takeover of a mint. A political event that no historian recorded survives as a ghostly outline under a helmet or a horse. The kingdom begins to reappear not through one grand discovery, but through thousands of tiny corrections to chronology. Numismatists notice another pattern. The artistic quality of some Greco-Bactrian coins is exceptionally high. Portraits are individualized, showing heavy cheeks, deep-set eyes, aging skin, or tense expressions. These are not anonymous symbols of kingship. They seem intended to present character endurance, youth, severity, divine favour, military confidence. The engravers working in Bactrian mints possess skills equal to those of major Hellenistic centres farther west. The coins contradict the assumption that the Eastern kingdoms were crude colonial remnants. Then archaeology begins uncovering the cities behind the portraits. Ancient Balkh, long associated with Bactra, presents a difficult challenge because settlement continued there for centuries. Later walls, buildings, destruction layers, and modern habitation obscure the Hellenistic city. Excavators find traces, but the royal capital remains harder to reconstruct than its fame suggests. Elsewhere, isolated sites preserve clearer evidence. The most dramatic breakthrough comes at Ai-Khanoum. The site is identified in the 20th century near the northeastern frontier of Afghanistan, where the Kokcha River meets the Amu Darya. Excavations reveal monumental structures on a scale few had expected. A Greek theatre emerges from the earth, a gymnasium, palace, temples, courtyards, fortifications, and private houses follow. Inscriptions appear in Greek. Architectural fragments resemble forms known from the Mediterranean, yet the city's layout and construction also reflect Iranian and Central Asian traditions. The discovery changes the historical imagination of Bactria. The kingdom can no longer be understood only through kings and campaigns. Ai-Khanoum reveals teachers, athletes, administrators, priests, craftsmen, soldiers, merchants, and families living inside a planned urban environment. A treasury preserves records of payments and goods. Storage rooms show the practical work of government. Residential spaces suggest how elites organized private life. Scratched letters, broken vessels. Gaming pieces and tools recover moments too ordinary for ancient historians to mention. Among the inscriptions are the Delphic maxims, moral sayings copied from the Greek world and displayed thousands of kilometers from their supposed source. Their presence confirms deliberate efforts to preserve Greek education and ethical tradition. Yet the temples refuse simple classification. One sanctuary appears Near Eastern in form, while containing imagery that may connect with Greek religious ideas. The city demonstrates that cultural exchange is not a late development occurring after Greek power weakens. It stands near the centre of the kingdom from the beginning. Other discoveries widen the picture. At Taxila, excavations uncover layers associated with Achaemenid, Greek, Indo-Scythian, Parthian, and Kushan rule. Streets, fortifications, coins, pottery, and domestic structures show a city repeatedly transformed without losing its importance. At sites across Gandhara, classical decorative forms appear beside Buddhist architecture. Inscriptions name Yavanas who serve as donors, officials, or members of local communities. Each find weakens the idea that Greeks remained isolated behind palace walls. Evidence also appears far from monumental cities. Burial sites reveal weapons, jewellery, horse equipment, and changing funeral customs. Pottery distributions trace trade and settlement. Irrigation channels demonstrate that political power depended on managing landscapes, not merely occupying fortresses. Scientific analysis of metals helps identify sources of silver and copper. Satellite imagery and regional surveys reveal ancient canals, roads, and settlement mounds invisible from ground level. Yet archaeological discovery brings new uncertainty as quickly as it removes old uncertainty. A Greek-style object does not prove that its owner was ethnically Greek. A local artisan may copy a foreign form. A Greek inscription may serve a multilingual community. A destroyed layer does not automatically identify the attackers responsible. Nomadic conquest, civil war, looting, fire, abandonment, and later rebuilding can leave similar traces. Scholars still debate the population of cities such as Ai-Khanoum, the identity of their founders, and the exact political events associated with their destruction. Modern history adds another layer of fragility. Afghanistan's wars interrupt excavation, damage sites, scatter collections, and encourage looting. Objects removed without proper records may enter private markets, preserving beauty while destroying context. A coin separated from its hoard loses information about date, circulation, and political change. A sculpture without a documented excavation layer becomes harder to interpret. The rediscovery of the kingdom is therefore accompanied by a second danger of disappearance. Even so, The surviving evidence is now too extensive to dismiss. Greek Bactria was not a fantasy invented by later writers. It possessed cities, dynasties, armies, industries, religious institutions, schools, administrative systems, and regional ambitions. Its rulers issued some of the most sophisticated coinage of antiquity. Its people participated in a world stretching from the Mediterranean to India and from Iran to the Central Asian steppe. Archaeology has not restored the kingdom whole. It has made the gaps more visible. Every new ruler identified on a coin creates questions about rivals and territories. Every excavated temple reveals beliefs that remain difficult to name. Every ruined city shows how much was lost when its archives and voices disappeared. The hidden Greeks beyond the Hindu Kush have returned to history, but only through fragments, and those fragments point toward a legacy larger than the kingdom itself. The Greek kingdoms beyond the Hindu Kush disappear as political states, but they do not disappear from the cultures that replace them. Their rulers lose cities, dynasties, and armies, yet many of the systems they established remain useful to their successors. Coinage continues to carry Greek letters long after Greek kings have vanished from Bactria. Artistic forms survive in workshops serving new patrons. Administrative habits pass from one court to another. Religious communities absorb foreign symbols and reinterpret them. The kingdom's afterlife is not preserved through loyalty to a fallen dynasty. It survives because later peoples find parts of its world worth keeping. The Saka and Indo-Parthian rulers who expand into former Indo-Greek territory do not erase the monetary language they inherit. Some issue coins closely modelled on Greek designs, retaining royal portraits, standing deities, and inscriptions arranged around the edge. Greek words may become increasingly distorted as engravers lose fluency, yet the script remains visible because it still communicates authority and economic trust. On the reverse, Kharosthi inscriptions continue to address local users. The bilingual coin created under Indo-Greek rule becomes a political technology available to anyone who controls the mint. This continuity demonstrates the difference between conquest and replacement. A new king can destroy a rival family while preserving the rival's tax system. He can reject Greek ancestry while using Greek imagery. Merchants care that silver maintains its expected weight. Soldiers care that payment is accepted in the market. Officials care that records can be understood. The most practical parts of a fallen kingdom often outlive its monuments. Farther north, the Yuezhi principalities gradually consolidate into the Kushan Empire, under rulers such as Kujula Kadphises, Vima Kadphises, and Kanishka. Kushan authority stretches across Bactria, Afghanistan, Gandhara, and large areas of northern India. This empire is not Greek, but it rules many of the same roads and cities once held by Greco-Bactrian kings. Its population includes Iranian, Indian, Central Asian, and surviving Hellenized communities. Kushan coins display an extraordinary range of gods, drawn from Greek, Iranian, Indian, and other traditions. Greek language also remains part of Kushan royal expression. Early Kushan issues imitate existing coin types, and later kings use Greek script even when the language being written is Bactrian, an Iranian language. This choice is one of the clearest signs of the long institutional afterlife of Hellenistic rule. The alphabet of the former conquerors becomes a tool for expressing a local Central Asian language under a nomadic origin dynasty. Greek political identity has faded, but Greek letters remain useful. In art, the legacy is even more visible, though its path is difficult to trace precisely. Gandharan workshops produce Buddhist sculpture using a visual vocabulary that includes naturalistic bodies, deeply folded garments, wavy hair, architectural columns, vine scrolls, winged figures, and other forms with Hellenistic connections. The Buddha appears not as a Greek god disguised in Indian religion, as older explanations sometimes suggested, but as the product of several artistic traditions working together over time. Greek influence is one part of that development, joined by Indian religious concepts, Iranian court styles, Central Asian patrons, and contacts with the Roman world. Many famous sculptures date centuries after Demetrius and Menander. The artists who carved them may never have thought of themselves as preserving Greek culture. They were creating Buddhist images for monasteries, donors, and pilgrims, yet some of the forms available to them had travelled east through the same historical processes set in motion by Hellenistic settlement. Buddhism itself benefits from the connected world of the northwestern frontier. Monasteries flourish near roads linking India with Bactria and the Tarim Basin. Merchants and rulers provide donations. Monks move through regions controlled by changing dynasties. Texts are translated, teachings adapted, and sacred images transported. From Gandhara, Buddhist traditions eventually spread deeper into Central Asia and China. It would be an exaggeration to credit Greek kingdoms with causing this expansion, but their cities, roads, currencies, and mixed urban environments formed part of the landscape through which it occurred. Menander remains the most personal expression of this legacy. In the Questions of King Milinda, the foreign monarch is remembered not as an enemy defeated by Buddhism, but as a ruler capable of understanding it. His Greek background makes the story more powerful. Wisdom crosses a cultural boundary, and royal pride yields to careful reasoning. Whether the historical Menander truly followed this path matters less to the afterlife of his image than the fact that Buddhist tradition considered such a transformation meaningful. The Greek presence also alters ideas of kingship. Hellenistic rulers present themselves through individualized portraits, divine associations, victory titles, and public coinage. Indian and Central Asian monarchs already possess rich traditions of royal authority. But the encounter creates new combinations. Later rulers place their own faces on coins, claim grand titles in several languages, and present themselves to different communities through different gods. The king becomes a multilingual image moving across his territory in metal. Even the idea of geography changes. Before Alexander, the lands around the Hindu Kush were already connected, but the Hellenistic conquest created new political links between Bactria, Iran, and northern India. These links did not remain stable, yet later empires repeatedly attempted to control the same corridors. The Kushans, the Sasanians, early Islamic dynasties, Mongol rulers, and many others would recognize the strategic value of the region. Whoever commands the passes can influence trade, migration, and war across a vast section of Eurasia. The survival of Greek communities themselves is harder to follow. Some may have retained language and customs for generations under new rulers. Others merged into local populations through marriage and gradual cultural change. Greek names appear sporadically in inscriptions, but a name cannot reveal an entire identity. By the time Bactria enters later historical periods, the descendants of settlers are no longer distinguishable as a separate political people. Their disappearance is social rather than catastrophic. They become part of the populations around them. This is perhaps the most important correction to the image of a lost kingdom. The Greeks beyond the Hindu Kush did not simply vanish when nomads crossed the Oxus. Their kings vanished. Their institutions changed owners. Their cities were damaged, rebuilt, renamed, or abandoned. Their language lost ground. But people continued living among the ruins, using roads, cultivating fields, worshipping at new shrines, and carrying older techniques into new worlds. The kingdom's legacy therefore lies not in a pure Greek civilization preserved in Asia, but in the opposite, a civilization transformed by Asia until its separate boundaries became impossible to maintain. Its rulers began as heirs of conquest, claiming legitimacy from Alexander and the Hellenistic West. They ended as participants in a much larger Eurasian history, shaping and being shaped by Iranian, Indian, Central Asian, and nomadic societies. Beyond the Hindu Kush, Greek power reached farther than memory expected. It built theatres beside Central Asian rivers, carried Delphic teachings into Afghan valleys, placed Indian scripts beside Greek kings, and allowed a ruler named Menander to survive in Buddhist philosophy. The kingdom disappeared because every kingdom eventually does. Its influence endured because it had never belonged to one world alone. The Hindu Kush remains where it has always been, rising above roads that outlive every kingdom attempting to control them. Snow settles over the passes, rivers continue descending toward plains where cities once depended on carefully maintained canals, beneath modern fields and damaged ruins. Fragments of another world still wait a broken inscription, a corroded coin, the foundation of a column, the outline of a wall that once enclosed a theatre filled with voices. The Greeks who crossed these mountains did not know that history would remember them in fragments. They built as though their cities might endure indefinitely. Kings placed their faces on silver with the confidence of men who believed the order could be fixed in metal. Teachers copied moral sayings from distant Delphi. Officials counted grain and soldiers. Merchants weighed gemstones brought down from the mountains. Families raised children who inherited stories of the Mediterranean but knew the rivers of Bactria as home. Then the names of their cities faded. Dynasties collapsed into sequences scholars still struggle to arrange. The languages spoken in courts changed, and new rulers placed new titles over older symbols. Yet the landscape did not become empty. Farmers returned to the fields, traders followed altered routes, monks travelled between monasteries, craftsmen reused forms whose original meanings had already begun to shift. History continued not through clean endings, but through adaptation. That may be the quietest lesson of the kingdom hidden beyond the Hindu Kush. Civilizations rarely disappear in the way stories prefer. They do not always fall in one night beneath fire or invasion. More often, they become unrecognizable. Their institutions survive under other names. Their descendants stop thinking of themselves as descendants. Their gods are reinterpreted. Their letters used to write another language. And their monuments quarried for buildings whose builders no longer remember who raised the first walls. The Greco-Bactrian and Indo-Greek kings failed to preserve their kingdoms, but they succeeded in creating connections that no conquest could completely reverse. Between Greece, Iran, Central Asia, and India, they helped form a world in which symbols, beliefs, artistic methods, and political ideas could cross mountains with soldiers and merchants. Their history is not important because it proves that one civilization reached unusually far. It matters because, once it arrived, it could not remain unchanged. As evening settles over the northern Afghan plains, the mountains darken first, the valleys hold the last light, and the rivers move quietly past places whose ancient names are lost. Somewhere beneath that fading landscape lies the dust of palaces, gymnasiums, temples, and markets built by people who believed themselves far from the centre of history. For a time, they made that distant frontier a centre of its own. Then the roads carried the world onward.